Hello everyone, and welcome to the show.
If you should awaken, I will be there when you wake from your lovely
Welcome back. As you know, I'm in Curt Williams Jr., or you can call me Curt. And we'd like to recap some of our old episodes, our old chapters, so we can catch you up because we're moving very quickly. We're about to enter the second portion of my book. It's separated into three parts. We are actually doing the audio book. So we're showing the audio book here. So we're finished with the first portion. The audiobook's long, so it's better that I did it here and gave it away for free, because I have an opportunity to make videos to go with it to make it more interesting in a sort of a theatrical kind of visual way, and not because everybody can't focus just in literature trying to read. I don't like to read myself. You have people who are speed readers. Well, I'm just the opposite of that. I'm an anti-speed reader. So basically, for those people who like visuals, this is what we're here for. Now, to recap a little bit, in the beginning of all this book reading thing, we introduced how God created himself and the ethereal realm, the realm with the angels in it. And then he created Mother Nature because he had to select a gender. We know God is a he because his gender counterpart is a she. It could have gone either way. But it is lovely to think that the counterpart to God would be a woman's touch. It's almost as if God has to take care of all the books, but Mother Nature takes care of all of the beauty. I heard the other day that Oral Roberts said that there was no such thing as Mother Nature. Now, how the hell would he know that? We come to these conclusions because the only way that we're going to understand how things work in heaven is by using a code, using a sort of what you call a cheat sheet, left here by Hermes the Thrice Born. He called them the 7 universal principles. These 7 universal principles, if used properly, you have insight to how things work in heaven. The one that is one of the principles is correspondence. Correspondence meaning the same way things work down here are the same way things work up there. Universal principle of gender means everything in existence has a gender counterpart, and why wouldn't you think God would have one? If God insists everybody else has one, and even we know that God is a part of everything, which means that God is within both genders. All of you you transgenders and all this, you have to realize God is within you too. No one can tell you that they are of God and you are not if God is within everything. And anybody who tells that to you, just keep your head up. Come listen to me. The words of wisdom. And I'm not talking about my wisdom. I studied these words of wisdom. I studied everything I possibly could about Hermes the thrice born, the scribe of the gods, who is the brightest human being that ever lived. And I know some people say, no, that had to be Jesus. Well, he was Jesus' teacher. So Jesus wouldn't have been Jesus had it not been for Hermes. In fact, a lot of the things that are said about Jesus were rejected and they're not in the Bible, like, for instance, his marriage to Mary Magdalene. Jesus was, in fact, married to Mary Magdalene. One of his first miracles is at their wedding ceremony where he turned the water into wine. Yes. And by the way, Jesus also had children. So for all you biblicists who think he did not, well, come see me. We will have that discussion and I will prove that to you. Anyway, so we have the gender selection, of which Oral Roberts said there's no such thing as Mother Nature, but I'll talk to his people too. And then we have the creation of the universe. Correspondence teaching us and telling us that the Big Bang is a result of a birth between the greatest being that ever lived, the creation of all things, and his counterpart. Correspondence, same way things happen down here. You get a woman with a whole bunch of certain kind of eggs mixed in with a certain kind of sperm, and she might have 12 kids. Well, that's just a human. Imagine God and Mother Nature. Talk about water breaking, and you want to know how water got in the universe? Well, it's correspondence. These are the only clues that are left so that we may understand God. He gave those to Hermes and left them there for us. We have also the principle of rhythm and vibration. We have the principle of mentalism. That's one I'm going to spend a lot of time on because mentalism is the same thing as quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is science way of describing mentalism. Mentalism is God's way of expressing free will. You have free will because you're using your mind and you're using your mind to manipulate matter. This is what's happening here. So we're going to explain how all these things work and how all these things tie together. I was hanging out with some biblicists the other day and they basically rejected everything I had to say because if it's not in the Bible, it doesn't exist. We're going to have to get over that. We're going to have to get over that because we've learned a lot over the past few thousand years. And my words to those biblicists is that, well, not to the biblicists, but also to the scientists. Scientists, you are great, you are wonderful, but everything you've come up with was something that was already created by the Creator. Humble yourself enough to know that. And if you really want to have results from your experiments and get to the bottom of it, we here are going to teach you how to connect with your spirit. And once you connect with your spirit, it will tell you how to get to the results that you want to get to. Because we're going to beef up science. We're trying to raise the level of spirituality in people, but we're also trying to raise the level of science in scientists. Imagine something coming from outside of you, telling you how to answer the questions you have on the inside. Even Einstein said, look within. But it might have been him. I think that was Socrates that said that. Look within. If you want to find the answers to your questions, look within. Now, chapter 21. The IGIGs move to civil rights.
Chapter 21. The IGIG. Move to civil rights.
Today is Saturday, and tomorrow is my 60th birthday. My name is Lamar, and I am an IGIG. Tomorrow we have planned a big picnic by the river, and everyone that does not have to work the mines tomorrow is coming. We have been saving all kinds of winter nuts, and berries, and even some fruits. But most importantly, we have sweet milk, my favorite. My lady friend is making the sweet milk, and no one makes it like she does. Most of my children will be there. All except those who work the platforms on the space stations, where they change from the short-distance vessels to the long-distance freighters that shuttle gold to the mother planet. I used to be a foreman at one of the largest mines in Zimbabwe before I lost my sight. More than half the people that work the mines lose their sight. After a few years of working the caves, low torchlight causes blindness. I can hardly see, but I could hear like you wouldn't believe. That's why my friends call me, "Come here Lamar," because I can tell them what their Anunnaki bosses are saying about them. Just as soon as I wake tomorrow, I'm going to pack up a couple of mules with everything we need, and I don't want to forget my fingerboards, so we can have some music to dance to. Boy, guys love to dance at parties. Dance, yes, and I can even sing a little. Most of us can't talk very well. They say that it's because my great-grandmother was the only one out of all the IGIG that could talk a lot, and she passed it down to me. I'm like a mayor around here now, and in a few weeks we are going to have another meeting about the way they treat us around here. You see, I've only been free for about 10 years now, and before I was free I had to live in camps, like all the other working IGIG. For the first 40 or so years of our lives, gold mining is all that we can do around here. They won't let us do anything else but mine gold. Oh, that is the problem around here. Many of us want to do other things, like being a pilot. I could never be a pilot because they won't let IGIGs be pilots, even the ones that can talk. We can't be bosses either. We have to be workers all our lives, even though we know how to do the work better than the Anunnakas do. Oh well, I'm going to get some sleep right now and get ready for tomorrow. Did I tell you it was my birthday?
For hundreds of years the IGIG mine workers worked in conditions that were at best abhorrent. They were not allowed to wear shoes until a few years ago, cutting and mauling their feet on the rocks that were made jagged from the blasting that they do to keep the mines in operation. For the past several years, the IGIG have been dying in greater numbers than ever before, mainly because of the use of blasting powders that invade the upper respiratory system of the workers. Many protests have been going on with little results being made to improve the conditions for the workers. It is believed that the protest will inevitably become violent if the most that can be done is not done. The IGIG have been, and may always be, a very poor people. It seems to be that way because they know that they were a created being, with the creator being the Anunnaki. They call themselves gods, as if they knew how to create anything else. The Anunnaki have mastered the ability to manipulate DNA sequences in species. This allows them to create beings with special abilities to suit certain tasks. They then maintain the air of superiority by also creating spiritual doctrine that benefit the masters, as they call themselves. For years and years, the IGIG have been studying their history to determine the amount of obligation they should have because of the scientific accomplishment of the Anunnaki. The IGIG are discovering that there is yet another part of who they are that the Anunnaki have no control of. The IGIG call this the one inside, which makes them feel like they are an individual part of a much larger system that cannot be easily explained by the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki make the IGIG attend weekly meetings where they study what is called the words of the God. These meetings are designed to teach the IGIG to obey the Anunnaki, or else they shall perish from the face of the earth. And so the IGIG obey, yet in fear only. Early the next morning, Lamar found out that the protests were going to begin today. Today of all days. The day of the party. The IGIG knew that the protest must be done with great surprise, if it was to be done at all. So it will be the capital city where the party shall be held. Lamar was then informed by the council of the IGIG that this will be no ordinary protest. The terms of the protest are exact and non-negotiable. Either the IGIG will have rights or the IGIG will not work the mines. In preparation for the protest, the IGIG had organized a plan to leave the cities and live in the forest where they will have to adapt to the situation. Adaptation being a much better option than remaining slaves to the Anunnaki. The IGIG leadership seemed to have been planning this for quite some time, having accommodations prepared in the woods just in case things don't go so well. As the meeting began, not a single representative of the Anunnaki was in attendance. A note was sent, however, from the leadership that said that there will be no room for compromise. The IGIG must do the work as they always have, or suffer the consequences. No one really knew what those consequences would be, but what they did know was that a walkout was inevitable if a compromise was not made. And it was not made. Immediately the IGIG strike was on, and for Lamar, the party would just have to wait. Before the strike had even begun, the Anunnaki were waiting outside with weapons drawn. On this day the IGIG would have to run for their lives. They did not know if the Anunnaki were indeed seriously thinking about opening fire on the already oppressed beings. First there was one shot, then two. By this time IGIG were running through the streets by the hundreds, though all shots were just warning shots, and no one was hit by the pellets. Once the IGIG had reached the edge of the city, it was only a few feet from the woods. The IGIG knew that once they entered the woods, it would be most difficult to reorganize the two parties. What the IGIG could not understand was, how could beings that considered themselves gods be so ungodly and depressing? If they made us, how could they not love us? We are so lovable, said one of the IGIG. Now, it was into the woods for who knows how long, however provisions were indeed made. The IGIG had been preparing for this moment for many years, and the time now was as good as any. So well prepared were they, that every day's walk were found provisions and medicine if it was needed. 20 miles into the forest were cave dwellings that were left by a previous IGIG exodus. These caves were very dangerous, however. All the Anunnaki needed was to blast the entrances, trapping the IGIG in the caves forever. But now they were here and they were alive, at least for a while. Or until a new day.
Welcome back. Interesting, right? That's the way it was. The world's first movement of civil rights. Now, the next chapter is going to be basically the end of the chapters on the IGIG. This one is called Captured. This is one where the IGIG had been captured. And I'm going to miss the IGIG. I loved writing about them. Some people are going to ask, how in the world would you come to know the day in the life of an IGIG, or any of the stuff for that matter?
Chapter 22. Captured. It had been 2 years since the Anunnaki threat against IGIG had taken place. Thousands of IGIG survived after fleeing deep into the forest and woods. 8 seasons had been, and 4 groups of IGIG had traveled as far away from the lands later to be called Mesopotamia, venturing away towards any place that could provide cover so they would stay hidden. Wherever they were, they made sure that anyone that was within 10 minutes of their position would be discovered, and they would venture deeper still into the places where they may be concealed. The 4 main tribes would remain there, with diets consisting of nuts and fruits. The growth of the tribe was accelerated by their need to be mighty as they ventured as far away into lands that would one day become Western and Southwestern Africa. The jungles provided a canopy with great density that was needed, while the North African caves were robust and perfect for shelter. Many who had survived the wars became strong and would become leaders of their own tribes. By now they had borne several offsprings, and their offsprings had become leaders in their own right. The tribes would be governed by 4 main leaders that would send runners to report to each clan. Those who lived in the mountains and jungles became exceptional climbers, while those who lived in the caves would increase their ability to see in dimly lit spaces. One day while the IGIG laid in their slumber, a faint sound could be heard in the trees. As the IGIG sought cover, the sound seemed to remain for days and days. The IGIG quietly attempted to investigate the noise, but were unable to discover their exact position. Finally the sound stopped. The IGIG had by now journeyed deep into the caves that were found near the base of the mountains. Little did they know was that the machines were monitoring the movement of all things within the range of their detection. The machines suddenly engaged and rose high again. Well above the forest canopy, they would rise and remain there in silence for days at a time. Each time the machines would rise, the IGIGs would investigate. It was their nature to be inquisitive, and the instinct was to scurry with a quickness to combat being yet captured again. This response became a pattern. When the machines rose, the IGIG would discover where they were landing, and when they came back up, the IGIGs would scatter until finally, the machines discovered exactly where all IGIGs were hiding. Early one morning, the sounds were heard again, however this time, they were bigger and there were more. As the sounds grew closer and closer, the IGIG ran further and further into the dark musty caves. As the drone sat down, one of Lucy's offspring recognized them, and knew exactly what they were and that they were an Anunnaki creation, a tool of the beasts of war. This immediately became a matter of life and death as the fleeing spread all through the forest and jungles of Africa. The Anunnaki were not only prepared to locate the IGIG but also capture them as well, but for reasons unknown. Did they need them to work in the mines again? Or did they just want to finish them off? All the IGIG knew was that if they were to survive they needed to run, and run fast. As other sky vessels landed, they released predators to hunt down and capture. As they rushed through the forest, they looked back to see that these were not just any kind of predators. Somehow, someway, they appeared to be IGIG that were now working for the Anunnaki. The predators began to search all through the forest. The IGIG suddenly observed one IGIG trader that stood out over all others. This IGIG seemed to be leading the search parties, and she instinctively knew just where they were hiding, all of them. Those that had trod deep into the cave's caverns were trembling behind the rocks as they stacked rocks, hoping to lure them into a dark corner and use the rocks to protect themselves from the trepidatious traders. At the entrance of the smallest cave, 5 of the IGIG predators began to quickly enter. Deep within the caves were hundreds of IGIGs ready to fight, and fight hard, or to die hard, slaughtered in the caves where they lived. No way, no how were they ever going back to the life of slavery. It all seemed quite strange. No matter how well trained or well equipped these few IGIG traders were, they surely had to know that they were no match for the hundreds of IGIGs that were waiting to fight for their lives. This would mean suicide. This would mean death to the 5. As the intruders entered the silence of the cave, a sound broke out. A sound of acute familiarity. A voice like no other, the sound that only one voice could make, and all IGIG did honor.
Come out, come out.
She cried.
Come out.
The entrance of the caves were now surrounded by IGIG as the voice shouted out.
It's me, Lucy. It's Lucy. Come out.
Yes, it was Lucy. Lucy, the greatest IGIG of them all, calling as her words resounded, energizing the walls of the caves.
Come out.
One of the IGIG leaders could not help responding. It was one of Lucy's offspring who had known not the fate of his mother, as he ran up and leaped into her arms. What joy! For Jews and absolute jubilation, as a great crowd began to jump and scream. Screams of happiness and of wonder, for to see that one of her offsprings had survived, as well as all others, as they stood weeping. You see, the reason why so many IGIGs were still alive to flee into the forest and jungles back then, was not because they were too fast or too wise to be caught, but rather because one of the IGIG stood before the advancing Anunnaki warriors, and she held her hands high. And she began to speak, as the Anunnaki stood in shock and astonishment. The Anunnaki were so surprised at this IGIG's ability not only to speak, but also her advanced intellect. Because of her, a ceasefire was enacted, as Lucy became their leader and spokesperson, and an agreement was made between the IGIG and the Anunnaki. All IGIG would be relocated to live and be free forever. But only the IGIGs that had escaped were unaware of the new circumstance and the new future that the IGIG had in store. It was then up to Lucy and a scant group of IGIGs to round up and bring good news to the fleeing others. And at last, they were found.
The end of Audiobook 1, chapters -1 through chapter 22.
Welcome back. Thank you for coming. Please subscribe. The book is only going to get better. The stories only get better because now we're getting into the creation of mankind part. That's going to be very exciting. See you next time. I love everybody.